what's basically been agreed is that we have an EU settlement scheme that is likely, even in the event of a no deal, to go ahead. And that requires EU nationals to register to confirm their presence in the UK. They're going to be able to do this pretty simply. And as I say, if we left without a deal, the timing on that would change, but the principle would remain the same. i.e., if they are here already, if they are thinking of coming, they will need to register simply online with the authorities to say, here I am, this is my nationality, you know, I've been here for this long, here's evidence of that. I'll talk about that in more detail.
Seen that?
Sorry?
Have you seen the structure of that? Because I've seen the website and there's nothing there.
Okay, not at the moment, because it actually, interestingly, is due to open.
29th of March.
No, it actually, for some people, it's due to open on Monday, 21st of January. So, yeah, but not for everybody. It depends if you're here with a passport, or if you're a family member, you've got a biometric residence permit. But effectively, it will open on Monday for many people. Our immigration rules, mainly governed by the Immigration Act 1971, are exceptionally complex, difficult to read, often drafted in a hurry, so hard to understand what they mean. And obviously, those on top of those are EU treaty regulations that have governed the position of EU workers, mainly in the UK, or EU nationals doing whatever, studying, being self-sufficient, you know, living here for the pleasure of doing so. It covers all of those people. So our immigration system is a complex thing, and I think it's always worth saying this. It's, you know, the importance of the political dimension can't be underestimated, not least because we currently have a Prime Minister who was Home Secretary and in charge of this stuff for 7 years. She takes a very tough view of this. And I mean, there's been much talk of the hostile environment. As immigration lawyers, we were not remotely surprised to hear about this. We've known about the hostile environment since probably, a good decade. And I see no reason for it to change. Remember that it's a numbers game. The Conservatives have pledged, and it continues to be in their manifesto, that they will bring the numbers down. How they're going to do that is interesting, remains to be seen, because they won't take students out of the numbers. You know, EU nationals are possibly going to be, they will be subject to immigration control. Businesses have continued to confirm that they will need EU nationals, the NHS, for example. Therefore, how are they actually going to bring the numbers down? Somebody's going to have to come in and pick the strawberries, as I'm fond of saying. Not likely we'll be able to, fill all of our jobs from inside the UK, as the Conservatives are hoping. So, you know, it is a numbers game. Our current immigration regime is complex. We run a points-based system, as I'm sure you're probably aware. There are still, despite the introduction of the points-based system back in 2008, hundreds of routes into the UK. It is complicated. And, you know, we can't underestimate the extent to which the policy is based on limits and quotas, and a great emphasis is placed on compliance, which for you as employers must never be underestimated. This is why this stuff is important. This is why immigration really has to be considered in a sort of standalone way. You need to always be thinking about this as employers, because the penalties for non-compliance are so severe and getting more so. Okay, so you know, that's really a quick overview of the immigration system. Applies to non-EU nationals currently, will apply to EU nationals as well. They will become subject to immigration control because, as Mrs May has said, and her ministers have said on a number of occasions, freedom of movement will end. The timing of this, I mean, when I first drafted these slides, the timing was rather different from what we're looking at now, but we're really looking at, Steve was talking about that transitional period, that we hope, we assume is still in place. That will mean that the system as it exists now, as in effectively allowing EU nationals to come into the UK, do whatever they want to do, so long as they register to do so, will continue until 31st December 2020. If we leave without a deal, which I'll come on to, that period is shortened, because we leave without a deal, likely to be no transition period just to say again now why immigration is important, and you guys will probably all be aware of why, which is that the penalties for non-compliance are really serious. There are fines, there are even prison sentences. It can be criminal liability for those who breach immigration control, or there's certainly reputational risk. It's very important that employers understand what their obligations are with regard to EU and non-EU workers, of all their workers. And you know, there are prevention of illegal working checks that we, you know, deal with a lot with our clients and recommend that people undertake rigorously as a matter of course. So the current position, as I said, pre-Brexit, is that, you know, freedom of movement is going to continue. We don't know when pre-Brexit will end, as we have currently. We think it's going to end on the 29th of March, which is not too short a time. But if there is then a transitional period, as I say, things will continue as is until the 31st of December 2020. So any EU national employees, family members can, I put this in inverted commas, relax until then. The EU settlement scheme is a scheme whereby the EU nationals here in the UK thinking of coming up until currently the end of the transitional scheme, transitional period, will need to make themselves known, register online under a system that, as I said, is coming in basically on Monday, on the 21st of January. I think I should emphasise this again and again. This is a mandatory scheme. So you may know EU nationals who've been here for 20 years. Why would I need to do anything? I've been here for a long time. I've worked here, I've run a business, I've been employed, I've paid tax, blah, blah, blah. I don't have to do anything, I'll be fine. Wrong. They do have to do something. They have to register. They have to. It's supposed to be a straightforward system that is going to be open in full by the end of March. It's a straightforward process with minimal documentary requirements. It's not going to cost much. It costs £65 per adult, £32.50 for a child. But you have to register. You can do it online, Android only. It's not open to iPhone. Apple's not open to it. And all you're doing is giving evidence that you are in the UK, giving evidence of your ID, that you've been resident for however long you have been, and that you have no criminal convictions. Those three things will be checked. The Home Office, the people who will be checking this, will look at DWP records, HMRC records, to see how long a person's been here, and they should just issue what they're calling settled or pre-settled status pretty much immediately. Settled status is going to be applicable to those who have been here for 5 years or more. That's effectively going to amount to permanent residence, going to have no restrictions on staying in the UK indefinitely. Those who have been here for up to 5 years will register for so-called pre-settled status. They'll then be able to, at the end of, the period, they will then be able to extend to bring them up to the 5 years to allow them to apply then for settled status, to give them permanent residence, to remove any restrictions on staying in the UK long term. And it's, I can't say this enough, mandatory, they're going to have to do it. Anybody who says to you, I don't have to worry, I've been here a long time, not true, they're still going to have to do it. Very important. Yes?
Is it reasonable for us as employers then to ask for that information and encourage the
Absolutely,
yeah.
yes. I mean, I was going to talk a bit more in a bit about what I think you as employers need to do, communication being the key. Right. I mean, as part of your prevention of illegal working regulation compliance, you should be saying to everybody in the business, I need to see your original passport and your original right to work in the UK ID, because I need to make sure that we are complying. Yeah. It's actually, oddly enough, not a law, enshrined in law that you have to, as employers, comply with these prevention of illegal working regulations, but it's a jolly good idea to do so, because if you don't, the penalties for non-compliance on you as employers are severe. You would be named and shamed on a website, you would be fined, if they consider that you should have known and you didn't, you should have undertaken the checks, they can really come down very hard on you. So
And should we incorporate that into our GDPR statement as well as data processes?
I would think so.
Mm.
See no reason why not.
So on that now, should we be getting these people to register now? Can we do it now?
I mean, obviously from Monday it's going to be open. I think what you need to do now is make sure that people understand that you know that this exists and that they need to, if they are an EU national in the UK, they need to get onto the website and register. And that is an obligation on them. Once they've done so, they can confirm to you that they have done so. It might take 2 hours for them to get confirmation back from the Home Office that they can stay. It might take a week, because even though they're saying it's going to be a very quick and easy process, everybody's different. Some people might have been here for 5 years, 2 of which as a student, 1 of which just as a self-sufficient individual, 1 of which as an employee and so on. And so it might not be possible for the Home Office to check all their HMRC, DWP records and see that they really have been here for as long as they say. So Home Office may come back to them and say, actually, can you send us your P60s and your tenancy agreements and a few utility bills to show us you really have been here over the 5 years, or as you say, for 3 years, so that we can issue you with this pre-settled or settled status. Most importantly, you communicate that to them, and doing that, you'll be, doing your duty, and once it is done, you'll be able to say to them, bring me evidence so that I can see that you have settled or pre-settled status as required.
Is there sort of a deadline by which they have to register?
By the 31st of December 2020, as things stand now. Were there to be no deal, the deadline would probably be 29th of March.
Because that's unachievable though, isn't it? In reality, that's unachievable.
Exactly right.
So,
I mean, exactly, as I said, I've never known them to do anything efficiently. I can hardly believe that they'll be able to get through 3 million applications between now, even if we started this minute, and the 29th of March, but that's right. I mean, many of the examples Steve was giving, I mean, when they don't know, they just don't really give any information. They don't say this may happen or this may happen, they're just silent. So you're left to kind of founder around in the dark and see if you can come up with a solution.
And who is it open to on Monday?
On Monday, it's going to be open to EU nationals who are in the UK with a passport, as opposed to those who are in the UK with just an ID card. Those non-EU national family members must have a biometric residence permit, which is like a sort of credit card, which is issued to all non-EU nationals in the UK who are here for more than 6 months. So if you're coming for any reason other than a visitor, you have to apply for and obtain a biometric residence permit or BRP.
And can it be done via a computer, or does it have to be an Android?
It has to be Android.
Really? So I have to buy myself an Android or an iPhone.
The answer to that is that I'm not absolutely sure, but
Yeah,
you definitely can't do it on your iPhone. I mean, I can't believe they're expecting those who only have, again, they've not been very clear about this, who only have an Android phone to do it. But they hadn't released much information on this last week. Whether they have until now, I'll have to confirm with you. But I think that they must be opening it to computers generally.
Yeah.
As far as phones are concerned, Android only.
So what's going to happen to EU citizens that are here with just an ID card?
They are going to have to apply later. They won't be able to apply on Monday. It'll be open, I'd say, end of February, beginning of March. And those people will have to apply later. Yeah.
And
they'll have to apply.
is the government, or will the government be advertising this? I know that we as employees have a duty of care.
I mean, I think that if you ask someone from government, they probably say, oh, we've always put a lot of this information online and it's all there. I would say they haven't done that very well, because it's very confusing. I mean, the gov.uk website, which deals with immigration, is incredibly confusing. This is from somebody who's been dealing with this for 20 years. It's very confusing. I don't think they'll be advertising it. I don't think there'll be posters up saying, are you an EU national? You should get yourself registered under the EU settlement scheme. No, is the answer. And I think it is more up to you as employers to make sure that people understand, communicate to them that it is a mandatory requirement. Best to do it sooner rather than later, just in case we leave with no deal and suddenly the transitional period is no longer happening and there's much less time. So best to do it as soon as possible.
Does those people that are here and have had children here,
Yeah,
do the children need to be registered?
they do, but they do need to, but there's actually a much better thing for them to do if they're willing to do this, which is as soon as they get their settled status, or if they already have permanent residence under the old EU treaty rules, which are in place now, and they have been in place until the introduction of the EU settlement scheme. As soon as their parent gets permanent residence, which they'll be able to get either under the settlement scheme or under the old rules, the child will be eligible to register as a British citizen as long as they're under 18. So worth doing that, because if the kids know that their future is going to be in the UK, it's a good idea to get them registered, because they'll be automatically eligible to register as British citizens as soon as one of their parents gets permanent residence. If you apply under the EU settlement scheme, say you've been here for 5 years, you apply under the EU settlement scheme, you won't be able to apply yourself to naturalise for 1 year. You need 12 months with the EU settlement scheme. Under the old rules, the current rules, the EU treaty rules, permanent residence is issued, much longer format, big form to fill in, 80 pages, lots of documents you have to send in. Those people, many of the employees that we're talking about that work with you, may already have that. We say, I'm fine, I've already got permanent residence. Even if they already have permanent residence under the EU treaty rules, they still have to register. It will be free, they won't have to pay the £62.50, or £62, but they will have to register. But yeah, for the children, look at registering them as citizens, which they will be able to do as soon as one or both of their parents gets permanent residence. So, the implementation period, as I just said, things will continue as they are now until the 31st of December 2020. As far as the EU settlement scheme is concerned, people, so long as they are here by the 31st of December 2020, will be able to register at any time up until the 30th of June 2021. What they can't do is arrive on the 1st of January 2021 and say, I want settled status, and then, stay permanent. No. They are then likely to be subject to the much more tough immigration regime that is going to apply to EU nationals after the end of the transitional period, which is going to be, as I keep saying, similar to those, they're going to be subject to immigration control, so they'll be treated the same way as a US national, a Russian national, a Chinese national. Much tougher. So that's why there is plenty of time, as I say, so long as we don't leave with no deal, for them to make this application, but best to get on with it as soon as they can. So the post-implementation period being the period immediately after 31st of December 2020. They have until the 30th of June 2021 to register, but they need to have been here by the 31st of December 2020. Similar with their family members. Family members include parents, spouses, civil partners, durable partners, grandparents. So long as the relationship with those family members existed, as at the end of the transition, as on 31st of December 2020, and they can prove that, the family members can also make applications under the settled status regime up until the 30th of June 2021. Be that they won't be able to just get through it that quickly because you may have been here in a variety of ways, at some point student, some point self-employed, some point they may have spent a year away, come back again, been employed. At that point, if your situation is not utterly straightforward and the Home Office can't check with the HMRC or DWP, DVLA for records, then they may well ask the applicant to provide additional documents. So it's worth saying to them, make sure you've got your P60s, a few utility bills covering the 5 years or the 3 years or however long you've been in the UK. It doesn't have to be a huge file of documents. It's worth having 1 or 2 per year showing you've been here. The other thing that's worth doing, if the people concerned are interested in eventually applying for British citizenship, is making a list of the absences they have had from the UK. And I appreciate that is a very difficult thing to do because a lot of these people have been back and forth. They might not be able to even remember how many times they've gone across the channel and come back. But if they choose to naturalise and gain a British passport, they will be asked how many trips have you had outside of the UK covering the previous 5 years. What they're looking for there is whether anyone has been outside of the UK for more than 6 months in any one 12-month period. Because if they have, their application is likely to fall for refusal. Having said that, if there's a very good reason for them having to be outside, I recently worked with a chap who was a lawyer for the EU. He was in Brussels Monday to Friday. His home and family were here. He'd obviously been outside of the UK for more than 6 months in one 12-month period. We got them to apply discretion. They approved it. It was fine. But they will look at each case carefully, certainly for British citizenship purposes.
Sacha, if in a hard Brexit situation,
Mm-hmm.
so the settled status and pre-settled status, well, it'd be a mess, I know, but in effect, that just comes into effect on the 29th of March.
Well, what they're saying...
Or is it completely out? It's just, there's no deal.
Don't know is the honest answer. But it looks likely, and they've said, if there's no deal, what you're going to have to do is make sure you're here by the 29th of March. You can't exactly arrive on the 2nd of April, because by that time, other rules may apply. What other rules? We don't know. Because the white paper, which outlined the new immigration rules that the government have introduced back on the 18th of December, they're undertaking a 12-month-long consultation on this, so those won't be in effect on the 2nd of April. What rules will be in effect? Who knows? This is what's driving me to tell people, apply as soon as you can. That's the best advice.
If we have people that either, for whatever reason, don't apply,
Yeah.
or for some reason unknown to us are refused, are they still actually employed?
Good question, because again, a little bit unknowable, because it depends when. But effectively, certainly after the end of the transitional period, as things stand now, the answer is no, because they won't actually. They'll be subject to immigration control. They won't be able to provide you with evidence that they have the right to be and work in the UK if they've done nothing.
So that would mean then, just like we do collect passport copies, we should be, if you like, allowed to have proof that they have applied for.
You must have that. Yeah, you must have it, because it will save you in the event that there's no evidence on somebody in January, February, March 2021. You can say, I know they've got settled status, here it is. They got it back in March 2019, February 2019. If they did nothing, transitional period ends, new immigration rules come in, EU nationals are subject to the same rules as those governing Chinese, US, Japanese, Brazilian nationals. They've done nothing. You can't employ them. They're subject to immigration control. And they haven't done what they need to do to be able to be here and work in the UK. There is little doubt in my mind, assuming that Brexit goes ahead in one form or another. In fact, there's no doubt in my mind that EU nationals will become subject to immigration control, because the government have said enough times that freedom of movement is going to end. I can't see how they're going to row back from that, apart from if we have another referendum and choose to remain. Freedom of movement continues, no issues. So, keep a record of absences from the UK, good idea. I know it's a big ask, because a lot of people have travelled a lot, but that should be part of the application process. So, just moving on now to this white paper I mentioned. So, the UK government asked the Migration Advisory Committee, an organisation to whom they turn for advice on recommendations for changes in the immigration rules. The Migration Advisory Committee look at the market generally, look at the current immigration rules and think about whether there should be any changes. And they came back, they did that in September 2018. They came back with their recommendations at that point. In December, the government published a draft white paper in which they proposed a number of changes that may come into force. A year-long consultation will now is supposed to be taking place now, to check how doable and how viable these changes may be, and check what employers and business in general think of them. And if that consultation period is going on currently and is likely to go on for about a year from now, And if the white paper is approved and comes into law, there are certain very interesting changes that that will come into force. As I mentioned, I think you all know, we have a points-based system. Tiers 1, 2, 4 and 5. Tier 2 applies to sponsored workers who are basically employees, and those people are mainly going to be affected by the changes. You may be aware that if you want to employ currently a non-EU national, and will be an EU national after the end of the transitional period, you have to advertise the position. You have to make sure you've trawled the European labour pool to make sure nobody can do this job. And until you've done that, a work permit won't be issued to them. The Migration Advisory Committee and the White Paper have recommended you get rid of that. No more advertising required. They've recommended removing the cap on these the number of these sponsored skilled worker permits. They've recommended reducing the minimum skills threshold, and that's very important because at the moment, as things stand under our current immigration rules, the only way you can bring someone into the UK to work is if they are highly skilled. So anyone with an administrative position, anyone who isn't so-called highly skilled, which may include a lot of manufacturing jobs, for example, whose job description is not given in the so-called codes of practice. The Home Office publish pages and pages and pages of job descriptions for which they are willing to issue work permits. If that person's job description is not within the codes of practice, they can't get a work permit. They are proposing reducing the skills level. So therefore, for example, right now, trying to bring someone in an administrative role, impossible. They don't consider that to be a highly skilled profession, job. They're proposing reducing it, so it's likely that you'll be able to bring more low-skilled people in. They're going to review the shortage occupation list. Now, there are certain occupations in the UK, nurses are on it, certain tech professions, that we know that we have severe shortage of, and those people can get work permits, they're called certificates of sponsorship, they can get those very easily. So you don't have to advertise, you can just go ahead and take them on and get them work. But the white paper says, and I won't do it because it's a bit boring, but one thing the white paper doesn't do is deal with the situation of self-employed workers. So for example, many of you may have EU nationals working for you that have chosen to set up their own little companies and work for you in that capacity. Don't know how those people will be treated for the purposes of the new immigration rules coming into force in likely to be in about, well, probably 2 years' time, after the end of the transitional period if things don't change. So I think that there's a couple of things you can be sure of though, and one of those things is it's going to cost you. It's going to be more expensive. It's currently expensive to hire in and get work permits for non-EU nationals. There is an immigration skills charge payable for everyone that comes in and their family members of £1,000 per year per applicant. There is an immigration health surcharge, they've just doubled that from £200 to £400 per year per applicant. You've then got the work permit fee itself, you've then got the entry visa fee. So it is a quite expensive process. Currently, you've got advertising fees as well. That can be expensive. They're going to get rid of that, so that will slightly reduce it. So it is expensive, and they're likely to use that as a way of limiting the numbers of applications that are to be made. One way that they are likely to, they've intimated this in the white paper, they're going to extend what they call the youth mobility arrangements. The youth mobility scheme is under Tier 5 of the points-based system. It basically allows currently Commonwealth nationals, people from Australia, New Zealand, etc., to come here between the ages of 18 and I think 30, to come here for 2 years and work, do whatever they want. They are considering extending that to cover EU countries. That will still only give you, as an EU national, a maximum of 2 years to stay. So it's not going to solve the problem indefinitely, but it will allow you to be here. And I think that the government's thinking is it will allow the company in question to train up and recruit UK national workers during that time and not cause any problems in the business. So, yeah, knowns and unknowns. Well, there's plenty of unknowns really. Where do we end with that? I mean, unknowns is, we know what the process of the settlement scheme is. I've just described it. But we don't know how long it will take. So we don't know if you make your application, say you're here with an ID card at the beginning of March. It may take them 2 months, and not practicable, but I can't see any other way around it. So just the impact of Brexit on UK nationals in the EU, is you asked about that. I mean, as I say, the withdrawal agreement wasn't approved, but that did actually allow for reciprocity with the UK and other EU countries. Basically, it said, we're going to allow all of EU nationals in the UK to stay, so you have to allow all UK nationals in the EU to stay. That's not going to go through, so who knows? But it's likely, surely, that should we ensure that EU nationals currently in the UK can stay, that EU countries will do the
My
same.
question was about an employee of our company
Yeah.
that has to work abroad, whether it be exhibitions, training. So
Yeah.
what sort of restrictions might be put in place for the movement of a person short term to work in France, Germany?
Again, we're hoping that that would have been dealt with on a reciprocity basis in the withdrawal agreement. Now that that's not happening, they'll have to travel there in the same way as effectively they do now, only they'll probably have to get permission to do so. In much the same way as when you go to the US, you have to get an ESTA. You probably have to pay a kind of £15, £20 fee to make sure you can travel in. But it will be up to the individual governments. It will be, if the French say you're going to have to get a short-term work permit and you have to jump through the hoops to do that, then they're going to be able to do so.
So it won't be like an EU ESTA type scenario where you just apply.
Well,
for Europe.
I hope so.
It's fairly simple, to be honest.
It's very simple.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the UK are proposing.
Yeah.
I do not, given that the withdrawal agreement's now in the bin, we don't know that that reciprocity is going to be going to exist.
Okay.
But certain EU countries have, confirmed that they will allow any UK citizens to come in, live, work legally. That includes Germany, France, Holland, Poland, I think. Italy, Czech Republic. A few of them have certainly said we will ensure our doors are kept open to UK nationals coming for long or short term. They have said that. EU nationals, what they need to think about and do now, I think I've covered that by saying EU settlement scheme, think about family members, think about naturalisation. What can go wrong? What can go wrong is what the gentleman over there was saying, is they don't do anything. They don't do anything, and we get to the end of the transitional period, they could become subject to new immigration rules, which will be much, much harsher than freedom of movement will allow. It will be more expensive for their employer, it will be more difficult for them. I'm sure many of you may know of EU nationals who've attempted to make applications to stay in the UK, have maybe ticked the wrong box or not provided everything they need to provide, and have received a nasty letter from the Home Office saying, you've got to leave, and if you're not leave, you're going to be removed. If you don't leave, you're going to be removed. Frightening letter. I have a lot of people coming to me with those letters saying, it's outrageous, I've been here for 10 years, how can they do such a thing? We're usually able to, in fact, we're always able to turn that around. The letter's a lot more scary than it needs to be. It's, again, a hostile environment thing. But it isn't. I'm sure that a lot more of those letters will be coming out to EU nationals in the UK. We don't know the detail yet of how the settlement scheme will look. Seems to be pretty straightforward, but if they come back to you and say, we want more documentation, and you don't provide it in the form they want or for the dates they want, they could be issuing more of these nasty letters. At which point, we'll have to appeal to the discretion of the Home Office to say, look at this person's particular circumstances, and this is the way that they meet the requirements. So, no deal, what does it mean? No deal means, as I said, any EU citizen living in the UK by the 29th of March will have to apply under the scheme by then. They have to, because there won't be a transition period. So, again, those who aren't here by the 29th of March are going to be in a question mark over their position. because there won't have been time to get everybody onto the scheme. And are the UK really saying, anyone who hasn't been able to do that, you're going to have to leave, doesn't matter how long you've been here? Not likely, but possible. So again, make sure everybody applies as soon as they can. The UK have said they'll continue to honour the right of those who obtain settled status. But I think you have to have a little bit of a pinch of salt with that. Depends what government we have, depends how strict they've decided to be. It depends on whether the scheme changes in any form, because the likelihood is that when it opens, all sorts of problems will become apparent that they'll probably have to change. So EU citizens with settled status will be able to be joined by their family members from the EU, but they will need to do so as soon as they can, and they certainly will have to do so by mid-2021. Definitely by then. But again, they haven't included much detail about this, so in my view, it's worth asking people, if you've got an elderly parent who you think may at some point wish to join you in the UK, best to look into that as soon as possible. Make the application, ideally now, but if not, as soon as you can over the course of the transitional period or shortly thereafter as possible. And there'd be no guarantees that they'd be able to get here without meeting the requirements of the white paper, which by then will be the immigration laws. So what should businesses be doing? I guess the one thing I would say that you need to do more than any of, and I'm sure you're all absolutely aware of this, is communication. Communicate with your employees. Make sure they all understand. This is happening. There's a lot of uncertainty, so a lot of people are just thinking, well, it's so uncertain, I'm not going to do anything until I know for sure. Best not to take that approach, because things could change very quickly if we suddenly leave with no deal. So, HR leadership, preparing the HR function to lead on the Brexit people issue, manage your employees' risks, know what those risks are, plan your workforce to, you understand what the current and future skills are that you may need, and you bring in people at the time that you can do so to meet those needs as early as possible. Communication engagement planning. I deal with people a lot who, actually sit down with their employees, and we run a lot of surgeries where people come in and talk to us, saying, we don't know what to do, or my granny's, in France, I needed to be here, or my mum has had to leave but wants to come back. Everybody's situation is different. Best to make sure that you understand what everybody's individual circumstances are and if they've got any individual problems, because you don't want to be caught short suddenly, particularly if they're in a critical job for you. Focus on taking action now. Undertake that impact assessment to see where it might leave you. I've presided over the formation of loads of Brexit steering committees for our clients, and it's always a good idea to do that so that employees know that there is somebody who is aware of what they will need to do and when, and they can turn to if they need support, so that you can proactively address those workforce risks. So that's really what businesses need to be doing. I just want to quickly say something again about non-EU family members, because this is obviously, if you're an EU national, you're in the UK, you may have been here for many years, but if you've got non-EU family members, a lot of them are nervous, and they're thinking, well, I'll just go if my Brazilian partner, if my, American wife can't stay, I'll just go. They need to know their non-EU family members can make settlement scheme applications at the same time as them. At the moment, under current EU treaty rules, many of them will have had to already make those applications. They will have, non-EU family members usually have a 5-year visa, and at the end of those 5 years, they can apply for indefinite leave to remain, so permanent residence. Many of them will have already done that. But make sure you understand who they are and what they will need to do. So, permanent residence being the goal, both for EU and their non-EU family members. And as I mentioned earlier, always worth looking at naturalisation. If somebody's willing to become a British citizen and wants to do so, and their current nationality's government allows it, worth worth doing, because you will, it's a surefire way of being able to stay in the UK indefinitely. It won't matter how long you're gone. Currently, if you've got permanent residence or indefinite leave to remain, you're a US national, you have indefinite leave to remain, you leave for 2 years, you'll lose it. You'll have to re-qualify to come back in. British citizen, that's it. You won't ever have to think about it again. So it's worth doing, but it's, some governments don't allow dual nationality. Germany, for example, have a policy whereby they allow dual nationality, but only with another EU country. So when we're not an EU country anymore, what will happen? And there are a lot of German and British.
might go back to Germany.
So, yeah, worth looking at. Always worth considering naturalisation. It's quite a long process. Can take them up to 6 months to process your application. It's quite expensive, £1,200 or so. You don't have to relinquish your passport if you're making an application. You can send in a certified copy. It takes them 6 months to do. You then have a citizenship ceremony and you get issued with a British passport quite shortly thereafter. Definitely worth considering. So that's really all I wanted to say. I don't know if any of you have any questions on what I've said or any concerns. I mean, I appreciate that. I'm sorry to say that I wasn't able to be that definitive about all possible scenarios. Yeah.
If you are using an employment agency, and the person that you are employing short-term, medium-term is of EU, another EU member, how will that work? Who has to do the check? Is that done by the employment agency, or is that done by you as the...
It should be done, I mean, in law it should be done by the employment agency because they're employed them. But given that they're on your premises and working for you, albeit through an agency agreement, you should also undertake that process. And they should also make sure that they make their pre-settled or settled status application, because it will save them, in the longer term. If they are here for a few months / years, and then they go away and come back again, they'll be able to do so much more easily if it's after January 2021, and they've got pre-settled or settled status. They'll be able to just come back in, instead of having to qualify under the immigration rules, which they will do if they come back in after the end of the transitional period, as things stand now.
Okay.
I'm almost embarrassed to ask this question
Don't worry.
because it might be a stupid one.
No, don't worry.
But we use freelance installers or something like that. They might be just a sole trader, or they there might be a company, a limited company, and I pay them from a UK company to potentially go to France to do stuff for me. If we don't have an easy agreement, if there isn't a sort of European ESTA thing, how does that? What happens?
If they're already EU nationals and going into another EU national, well, it won't be an issue for them as long as they're.
Oh, sorry, no, they're
British.
So assuming they're British and they're
I
going
mean,
the other.
I think I hope I answered that, but this gentleman asked it before. I mean, the likelihood is we will have an ESTA type scenario, but it is also likely there'll be some sort of reciprocity. The issue is really timing.
Yeah.
Because, this withdrawal agreement, is in the bin. That actually outlined reciprocity. We're going to have some form of, formal reciprocity outlined in whatever agreement we end up being a party to. But the likelihood is that it will not be an issue.
And if there is a form to be completed, approval to be gained, which we think there will be, is that my responsibility or is that theirs?
It's probably yours, because you're going to be sending them to do a particular job in, say, France, for sake of argument. You want to make sure that particularly if they're going to, say, a branch office of yours in France, that branch office isn't in breach of any immigration regulations that may be imposed in France.
Yes, I need to make sure they can work there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my problem. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
If there's a round of applause.